Welcome to the Q-MindBody podcast. My name is Darren, and in this podcast, we're going to be talking about all things having to do with gay men's wellness and moving out of that realm of just talking about disease prevention and treatment and cures and into how we can live much better lives mentally, physically, spiritually, and so on. And so in our first episode, I have Kaelan Strauss. He is a wellness coach and an ecstatic coach. I've got to get that in there. Ecstatic coach. He's an author and an avid YouTuber. And he works a lot with gay men to help them improve the quality of their lives generally, but specifically issues around their sexuality. And we are going to be talking about sexuality and spirituality and the intersection between the two. Before we get started, though, if you would like to follow Kaelan, his website is ecstaticself.com. You can also follow him on social media, and as I mentioned, YouTube, and I will put all of that in the show notes. You can follow me. The link will also be in the show notes. My website is darrenmain.com. And you can like, subscribe, share, and most importantly, drop comments about future content you'd like to see, topics you'd like us to cover. And finally, we have a Facebook group, Q-MindBody. I'll put links to that as well. Kaelan, it is so good to see you again, my old friend, my young friend, much younger than me, but
Darren,
friends for a while.
Always a pleasure. You make me sound much more interesting than I am, though. It's just Kaelan, not Kaeleen. But either way, I'm just honored to be called something by you.
I have my Jedi power. You know, some people get like making shit levitate. Mine is mispronouncing names. So,
It's totally cool. I am honored.
yeah.
Whatever you want to call me, so long as you're calling
Kate
me.
is henceforth your drag name. How's that?
Absolutely. Or it could be my Jedi name, since we're talking about Jedi powers. How about that?
Your Jedi name. I will misname people, and you can make shit levitate. How have you been?
Oh, I've been really good. It's been an interesting time in my life because I'm dealing with the impending death of a parent.
Oh.
And at the same time of going through that, being reminded of the joy of getting to live. And so I feel very grateful in my own personal journey to be able to hold conflicting emotions, to hold grief and loss, and at the same time, the celebration of life. And I've been very grateful for this time.
Yeah. Let me know if you need any support around that, or the whole community for that matter.
Well, thank you.
So I asked you what you wanted to talk about today, and you chose sexuality and spirituality, which I think is a perfect first topic for this podcast. And I'm wondering what that means to you. I think a lot of us were raised in religious traditions where sexuality was shamed, especially gay sexuality, and finding some sort of place where those two things exist in our lives, not just in separate corners of our lives, but integrated, I think can be a trick. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the subject, and then we'll dive a little deeper.
I love that the topic of your podcast is gay wellness. And I know for myself, and I think a lot of gay men will agree with me, that sex is something that brings our lives a lot of joy, or it has the potential to, anyway. It's a powerful force that can bring a lot of effervescence, feeling alive, feeling juicy, feeling filled with possibilities. I think nothing feels so good as when somebody you're into starts flirting with you and you're like, oh, okay, cool. I'm feeling good about myself now. But like any strong power source, it can be tremendously beneficial. It can be used to help heal. It can also be used to cause great hurt. And I think we've all, if you've lived long enough, experienced great hurt in a sexual way from somebody, through their unkindness, through their violence, through their lack of concern. And as you, Darren, are exploring this paradigm of let's not focus on the pathologies, let's not focus on what's broken, let's focus on how do we be well, I think, how do we engage with our sexuality in a way that is mindful, that is joyful, that allows us to get our needs met, but that we see it as an integral part to wellness. that sex is not something shameful or dirty or wrong, even if when growing up we heard religious figures or parents saying that, but it's something that we are entitled to learn to enjoy without shame in a conscious way so that it can actually fulfill us and to help heal us.
Yeah. Well, let me pull on that thread a little bit because I agree with you 110%. But there's that saying, like in coaching, and I think in just in life, watch what they say, watch what they do, not what they say.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all say the right things. We all say we want more intimacy, that we don't want to feel guilt and shame around our sexuality, that, you know, I marched down Main Street carrying a rainbow flag, and
Yeah.
yet we do carry some of that brokenness with us, and we bring it into our relationships, whether they're
Mm-hmm.
casual or long term or whatever. And so we do hurt each other, and we do make mistakes, and we do feel guilt and shame and all of this stuff. How do we move, in your view, beyond simply saying, I want less shame, I want more authentic, grounded, uplifting sexuality in my life, and not just say it, but actually move through some of those blocks?
I think it always comes back to this idea of becoming more aware of what's going on inside, whether that's through meditation, therapy, journaling, art therapy, whatever that process is for you. But to realize that you are creating the blocks to your joy, you are creating the problems that are preventing you from experiencing unbridled, joyful, ecstatic energy in life with sexuality or just in general. And that as we turn that focus within and start to excavate those blocks, start to break through those tensions, we also become the key holders for our own internal liberation. And when it comes down to sex and sexuality, like, of course, sex is about pleasure, but I think much more than that. Our desire for sexual connection really falls on that latter word, connection, that there is this innate human need to see and be seen, to be valued, and to feel connected to something more than just our limited self. And
Yeah.
so when we make a bid for sexual connection, and this could be with another person, a group of people, but this could also just even be just within ourselves to connect with ourselves. When we do it in a way where we are also afraid of it, we're also afraid of being seen, we're afraid of being vulnerable, we're afraid of letting our true selves show. It's almost like eating junk food. It's almost like I'm consuming things, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have actual nourishment to it. And so as we start to break down our own blocks that prevent us from being authentic and vulnerable and seen, and we can offer our full selves to a potential partner or even just to ourselves. And as you
Yeah.
said, whether that partner's for short term, for an experience, or for long term, for years, doesn't matter. But to recognize that sex is so much more than just about
Yeah.
pleasure and touch. It is about wanting things.
Yeah.
And if we can be open within ourselves and do the necessary work to start break through those inhibitions that are keeping us from connection, then we can have a much more fulfilling sexual life and life in general. But that work really
Yeah.
does start within.
So I have this sort of working theory, and when I talk about yoga and sexuality, when I give talks on the subject, I frequently use this example that if we sex is so charged that we giggle at it, we laugh at it, we objectify it, we do all these things with it. So it makes it hard to have a heartfelt, open conversation. But if you look at food, right, we eat for all these different reasons. Sometimes it's just to nourish the body. Sometimes it's to share a meal with a friend. Sometimes it's because I'm lonely. Sometimes it's because I'm sad or depressed. Sometimes it's because I want to celebrate. There's all these reasons we eat.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are healthy and some of them are profoundly not healthy. And I think the same is true of the other appetites of the body as well, like our sex drive. It's there, and
Yeah.
yeah, we can do it just to procreate, or there's all these other reasons to do it. And some of them are unhealthy, right? So how do we, and I think as gay men, we may have cornered the market on various unhealthy ways to engage. Um, and we've also cornered the market on the most beautiful ways to engage because we've freed ourselves a little bit. And I'm wondering how you advise your clients or yourself on how to differentiate between those two. Like, when am I doing something that lifts me up? Because it can feel very liberating to break the
Hmm.
rules, but sometimes those
Absolutely.
rules are there for a reason. Like open communication and having boundaries in a relationship of some sort can be helpful. So I'm wondering how you navigate all that, how you help other people, other gay men, to navigate that.
One of the ideas that I tend to live by, it's a quote by Shakespeare, is there is nothing right or wrong, but thinking makes it so. You bring up this idea of rules. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of rules for rules' sake. I am a big fan of looking at those rules and examining what is my personal relationship to them? How do they affect me? Do they make sense for me in this moment? Make sense in general? You bring up the idea of food. Even these quote unquote unhealthy eating behaviors can sometimes be justified depending on your awareness around
Mm.
it and is it fulfilling a purpose. Take, for example, eating when dealing with a difficult emotion. Like, I know for myself, sometimes when I'm dealing with a really difficult emotion, yeah, I want some chocolate,
Mm.
or I really want that burger and french fries. And in the short term, it actually helps, right? For a little bit of time, it gives me a feeling of satisfaction. It gives me an emotional reprieve. The chocolate might boost my mood a little bit, and it works for a short period of time. Now, I think what the difference is one, am I aware that I'm doing it for those reasons? Am I aware that, hey, I'm using this as a coping mechanism? I know it's not long-term effective. I know it's probably not even the best coping mechanism, but for right now, it fulfills a need. That's a big
Mm.
difference than doing it unconsciously. And then the second thing is just being aware of, am I doing this because it's okay for right now? Or am I doing it because this is part of a long-term pattern? And I try to give myself grace when I'm in a pattern or in a situation where I know it's probably not the optimal one, but I'm saying, you know what? I'm really stressed. I'm really struggling. I know I need to do better, but for this moment in time, I have to be okay with the fact that this is the tool I have and this is
Mm.
how I'm going to behave. And long term, this is not what I want to do. But for the next couple days, the next couple weeks, this is maybe what I need. I think that's okay. So carrying that over
Mm.
to sex, saying, hey, you know what? If you are feeling lonely, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling, isolated and alone, and you need just, you know, a buddy to come over and get off with, and it's not meaningful, it's not conscious, it's not anything of substance, and you want better, but you also know that it gives you something for this moment, it alleviates something, it lifts you up in some way. I'm not one to judge that.
Yeah.
Long term, is that the way you want to live your life for the next 20 years? Hopefully not. Right? We don't want to
Yeah.
keep searching short term fixes for deeper problems. But I'm very cautious to call anything objectively good or
Yeah.
bad right away, to say it fulfills a purpose. It may not be the best way to get that purpose, the
Yeah.
thing fulfilled, but it serves a purpose for now.
Um, so when you brought up this topic when we were first chatting of spirituality and sexuality, I think that for me, for a long time, this has shifted in the past decade or so, but for a long time, it was more about saying there's nothing wrong with my sexuality, but it was sort of this thing I did over here, and then I
Yeah.
had my meditation and yoga practice over here, and there wasn't much of a Venn diagram there wasn't much overlap. as my as I've grown, I've started to see that those two things, there's no Venn diagram at all because the two circles have completely overlapped. But it's
Yeah.
taken some time to get to that point. And I'm wondering what your journey around that has been like, and how you how you work with men to maybe not just make peace with their sexuality in terms of I can be religious or spiritual and have a healthy sex life, but my healthy sex life can be an extension of my spirituality or an expression of it.
100%, I am right with you. There are many different spiritual and religious paths to walk, and some of them take this notion that certain things are sacred and certain things are definitely not. And you need to wean yourself off of the less holy things and align yourself with the more sacred things. That is a path that many traditions follow. It's not one that appeals to me. And I don't think it appeals to a lot of gay men, because we're going to enjoy sex. We're going to enjoy living in the world. We're going to take fabulous trips and go shopping and do all those things. We're not ever going to remove ourselves from the world in which we live. So I've been more interested in exploring the spiritual paths of inclusion that say everything is sacred. Everything is holy. Everything has an element of the divine in it. And if I don't see it, then that's the thing I need to work on. How do I learn to see the sacredness in the suffering? How do I learn to see the sacredness in the profane? How do I see the sacredness in the mundane, the stuff that's boring even? And if I can find God, the universe, Gaia, Allah, whatever you want to call it, in those places, then I've won. And so you asked me, like, what has my journey been with that? When I was younger, for those of you who know more about my story, I lived in an ashram for 7 years. So I was very much into the mode of a more renunciation sort of idea of like forsaking the world, forsaking certain behaviors. In the yogic tradition, there's this idea of brahmacharya, which, is tied to celibacy, being very aware of how your sexual energy is used. And I very much aligned with that. And I was very disconnected from my sexuality. And I was also very disconnected from other important human qualities like anger. For years, I couldn't get angry. There were moments where I knew I should have been able to, and I didn't. And I realized that there was a problem in that. I realized that I didn't want to be the kind of person who was disconnected from my humanity. And as I left that tradition and I left that kind of walk of life, I started to really dive into this idea of how can I learn to see the divine in all aspects of myself, and how can I find the sacredness in all parts of not just the human experience, but all parts of the world. And as one would expect, that also started to lead into the realm of sexuality. So how can I say that all aspects of me are divine, all parts of creation are divine, and yet call certain parts of myself and my desires and my actions, which are very human, wrong, bad, less than sinful? And so I've been very much on this kind of personal mission of starting to deconstruct the paradigms I learned even before the more rigid yogic renunciation practices of growing up Christian, growing up in Midwestern America in a very conservative town, growing up with parents where in our household there was a lot of shame around sex and sexuality, and start to really deconstruct that. And it's an ongoing process. It's not just like you wake up one morning and be like, oh, great. I threw that out the window. I'm all good now. Everything is sacred. Everything, my sex life is angelic. It's wonderful. It's an ongoing process of excavation. And here I am. I'm 36. I'll be 37 in just a couple of weeks. Still finding new ways that I'm seeing shame within myself, seeing shame within my desires, seeing shame within my humanity. And so it's something that I do very consciously. I do it in deep conversation with my partner. I've been married for 7.5 years, together for over 9. And it's something that I do very consciously in my meditation. Certain days, my meditation practice will be about connecting with my sexual energy and bringing that through my body and feeling it as an integral part of my life force. There's different meditation practices from various traditions that specifically work with that sexual energy to move it, to grow it, to bring more pleasure into your body, into your energy body. I do it through mindful interactions that I have with other men, whether that's just me flirting with somebody on the gym floor or maybe having a more sensual experience with someone. But looking at all the ways that I'm holding myself back from having the most fulfilling, embodied, joyful life that I can. and constantly having revelations. So, for example, I brought up this idea of the desire to see and be seen. One of the big revelations I had this past year is how many times I found myself in sexual situations where I didn't necessarily want to be in, where I really enjoyed the flirting process. I really enjoyed the process of interacting with somebody, but as soon as physical intimacy started, realized that I wasn't so much into it. And starting to discern for myself, say, okay, Kaelan, what is it you really want right now? And sometimes
Yeah.
saying, actually, all I really wanted from this specific person was just to feel acknowledged, to feel desirable, to feel sexy. And for me to
Yeah.
start decoupling, just because I'm attracted or turned on doesn't necessarily mean I want to engage. Sometimes all I wanted was to feel valued. And I've been getting better over the last many months now of saying, all I wanted was to flirt. And I'm really going to enjoy
Yeah.
that experience. And I'm going to lean into it and have that fun and feel that juiciness. And then there may be times where
Yeah.
saying, no, I actually do want to have a sexual experience. And I feel really good about that. And it feels like it's going to be something nourishing and meaningful, whether it's, just a one-off thing or something more ongoing, but to really get clear for myself through my own self-inquiry of what do I want and can I get my needs met?
Yeah. Um, it's interesting. As you were talking, I was just thinking about some of my own healing work around this, and some of the men that I work with. Um, some of the regret that we have, and we carry it as a compounding shame. It's like taking the shame we got as a child, and then we have regrets about all the times we did things that I felt like a good idea, and then we got started and it didn't, and you
Yeah.
know. I'm wondering. I have some thoughts about this, but I'm more interested in yours. Like, how do you embrace that? Sort of like I always think of like Yoda, where Darth Sidious shoots a dark lightning at him, and he takes it and reforms it and hurls a ball of energy back at him. I feel like things like shame, guilt, regret, anger, all of these things. It's okay to have them for a brief moment, but only long enough to transform it into something useful. But many of us carry it around for years and years and years. I'm wondering what your Yoda process is for, like looking at like, wow, I did this thing that I didn't, thought I'd give it a shot. I tried S&M once. It was awful for me. I'm sure it's wonderful for other people, but it was a learning experience. I didn't have to
Yeah.
carry it around forever. Just be like, oh, okay, whips and chains are not my thing. um, so take that and run with it for a minute.
I'm going to offer something that's not going to be easy for certain people to hear, or maybe a lot of people. In my own life, I have adopted this practice of saying thank you to everything. I don't care if it's pleasurable. I don't care if it's painful. I don't care if it's something I wanted. I don't care if it's something I desperately feared. I just shut up and say thank you. So, for example, a month or so ago, I threw out my back and I was in terrible, terrible pain. I couldn't sleep for several days because I couldn't get comfortable. And of course, I wanted to move into that space of bemoaning my situation. Why did this happen to me? How could I avoid this in the future? This is so inconvenient. This is so uncomfortable. And instead of dwelling in that space, one of the things I really pushed myself to do is to just lay there and say, thank you. Thank you. Sometimes I didn't know why I was saying thank you, but I was just saying thank you. And a
Yeah.
couple interesting things that happened by doing that. And this routinely happens whenever I employ this practice, and then getting better and better about doing it, is one, I start to learn some lessons. Some things get revealed to me about how maybe I could make slightly different choices, or maybe there's something in me needing to learn to slow down and pay attention to something that I've been avoiding. And so my back said, hey, we're going to make you lay in your bed for a couple of days to force you to slow down and examine it. So that's one of the benefits, is maybe listening for the bigger lesson. But the other thing that I think is really interesting is when you just say thank you, is by stating that, there is a positive feeling that arises in your body. You say thank you. when you express gratitude, this feeling wells up inside that is expansive, pleasurable, joy-filled, and it starts to shift my own internal frequency by bringing forth that more beneficent energy within. It starts to shift my reality a little bit. And when I hear stories or see examples of individuals who I would call saintly, on their way to enlightenment, experiencing a more elevated state of consciousness, one of the things that I see time and again are individuals that, no matter the circumstances in which they find themselves, they maintain a state of peace and equanimity. And it's not a forced contrived, I'm going to be calm no matter what's happening, but they've really learned to just accept whatever comes graciously and to see it as a blessing. And that's something I really want for myself, is I really want to get to the point that no matter what comes into my life, pleasurable or painful, I can see it as a blessing. And that doesn't mean you deny the feelings. A week ago, me and my husband were going through a couple really difficult conversations, as happens in any long-term relationship. And there were times where I found myself weeping. And even in that experience of weeping, still feeling an element of joy and allowing that emotion to flow through me, but watching how that wasn't the totality of my experience. And to be in this place where I could even be like, isn't this fun to be having this profound human experience right now? It's not particularly pleasurable, but there's an element of fun of like, wow, you're really alive. Look at this. You're getting to have these really profound moments. And so for people who are dealing with the regrets and shame or prior negative choices, it's difficult. And I get, especially when we're dealing with trauma, we don't necessarily want to lean into this idea. A friend point blank say to me when I brought this idea to them, well, there was nothing positive about this, so there's nothing I should be thankful for. If you can get to the point that no matter what happens, you find your gratitude, you find your thanks in it, you've won. Because let's say, and I've experienced this for myself, let's say you've had a really unfortunate sexual experience where you feel very violated. If you do not do your healing work, if you do not reclaim your own power and say, it is within my ability, independent of this other person, it was within my ability to forgive, to release and let go. If I never get to that point, then they still have power over me. Then they have the right to determine whether I'm healed or not. But if I can get to the point where I can genuinely say thank you, even though it damn hurt, I can get to that point, then I won. I reclaimed my power. I reclaimed my agency over my well-being. And so that's something that I really strive to get to, is that point of no matter what happens, I just say thank you.
Yeah. Do you know the author Timber Hawkeye?
Do you?
He's a wonderful author. He has a year or two old now new book called The Opposite of Namaste. And in it, there's a passage where he talks about being bullied and his parents saying and doing things that were abusive, and him learning from an early age that they had to be the ones to come and fix it, right? That they had to come say sorry, they had to kiss his boo-boos better, and how that set up a paradigm in his life where he was always waiting for the one who hurt him to be the one to heal him, and how you can't win with that. I mean, sometimes they do. They say sorry or whatever, they make amends, but frequently you're just left holding it and you're stuck in a pattern of not healing. And I think you were just speaking to that really beautifully. So thank you. Go ahead.
For me, it also goes back to the idea of reclaiming your power. Like, I don't want to have anybody else have the ability to dictate if I can be happy or not, if I can be well or not, or if I'm going to stand in my power or not. I want to have the agency to say, I can be as expansive and joyful and healed as is possible, regardless of what you do or don't do, especially because most of the people who hurt others are doing it because they are hurting themselves, but they are dealing with their own injuries, their
Yeah.
own brokenness, their own unconsciousness. And they probably have no awareness many times how deeply they hurt others or how deeply they hurt within themselves. And so waiting for
Yeah.
them to get to that point may be an endless period of waiting.
Yeah. Well, my friend, I love chatting with you, and my plan already is to have you back on for you mentioned about 6 different topics when we were getting ready to schedule this, and I'm like, I want to do all of them. So I am absolutely certain you will be back on. Ecstaticself.com is your website, and I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to talk about, how people can engage with you further. I know I'll link, of course, to your YouTube videos. I hear you have really good-looking, awesome guests on your YouTube show.
No, present company very much included.
Yeah, yeah, I was just fishing for a compliment there.
I told you before this interview started, you look younger and younger every time I see you.
uh, I think your eyes are failing with age, but thank you, thank you.
Maybe it's just a really good filter on the camera.
Sadly, no.
Yeah,
So how can people engage with you? What would be the best way if people wanted to work with you? How could they do that?
absolutely. You can reach out through my website, shoot me an email if you're interested in one-on-one coaching. I offer in-person retreats as well, usually groups around 10 to 12. I have one coming up this summer. There'll be another one at the end of the year. I'm trying to move to having about 3 a year. So please feel free to check that out. That information is on my website. I've written 2 books. I'm in the process of my third, which is a project I'm really excited about because it's also being paired with an ecstatic oracle deck. This idea of, choosing what is the lesson you need to focus on right now in your spiritual work. And I'm working with a fabulous author who's creating these beautiful, queer, uh, very romantic cards and illustrations. So it's a project I'm feeling really passionate about right now.
Awesome. I love that you're out there doing the work you're doing, and I've referred several people now to you and your work since we met a few years ago. And yeah, keep up the amazing work, because I think you and I, one of the reasons I wanted to have you as at least one of the first guests on this podcast is because I feel like we're sort of on the same page about empowering gay men to not just settle, not just stay stuck, not just be on the treadmill of hookups, and not that there's anything wrong with hookups, but just that there can be so much more, and you really go above and beyond helping our community achieve that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I'll bring back a metaphor you started this interview with, which was about food. And if you just drove around your local neighborhood, you would think the best options for eating were fast food joints because they're everywhere. But just because they're the most present ones doesn't mean they're the most nourishing. And you can make the conscious choice to sit down and have a really amazing
Yeah.
meal, or you can just go by whatever's on the side of the road that is easiest to access, which is probably not going to be as satisfying. And not that the other is much more difficult to find. You just need to be aware that there are other options and to look for them.
Yeah. So what you're saying is next time you're in Berkeley, you want to go out to Taco Bell for dinner? Am I reading
Okay,
the
sounds
metaphor
good.
right?
You got it. Big
Awesome.
burritos, please. Yes.
Yeah, supersize me. Okay, my friend, I will see you soon. And again, just for those of you watching or listening, you can listen to the podcasts um, anywhere you find podcasts. You can also watch on YouTube, and you can join our Facebook group, Q-MindBody, where you can continue the conversation and see other things we have posted. I'll see you all soon.